Antek Markets piyasa analisti Richard Perry bizleri bekliyor. Richard, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I would like to start with the recent remarks of Mario Draghi. After his remarks last week, we just see the longer end of yield curve moving upwards all over the markets. Do you believe that is going to be a sustained move? Because we just see US 10 years hovering around 235s, and also we also see the 10-year bonds moving throughout 0.5s. Do you expect more?
Yeah, it'd be interesting if Bunds can hold that breakout of 0.5, then I think it would be certainly a move to the upside. You've seen Bunds basically trading in a big broad range throughout 2017 between 0.15% to 0.5. So if it can sustain that breakout, if it can be made, then I think that certainly would open the upside. And you've seen sort of the longer end yields breaking out or certainly pushing higher across the board, and it'll be interesting to see if this is a continued move or if it's just a knee-jerk reaction to this sort of sudden sort of hawkish shift that we've seen across central banks through the major markets such as the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada and also the ECB. So can these banks back up that with sort of a follow-through with inflation picking up? That's the big question I think that markets will be questioning.
Do you believe that the markets are convinced throughout those central banks' perspective shift? Because when we look at the others, for example, yesterday we just saw Australian Central Bank and also the Riksbank. They were also expected to be hawkish, but they stood pat. Do you believe that they are going to be joining the party, or do you believe that the markets will be convinced in the near future? Because we just see just some part of that reaction right now, right?
Yeah, as I said, we've seen just some of the central banks moving towards a less dovish positioning. I think certainly the RBA disappointed markets this week. There was a concern about the strength of the Aussie. I think that is a consideration for the Reserve Bank of Australia. But I think, as I said, moving forward, inflation is the key. Are we going to see inflation picking up? Because at the moment, pretty much across the board, we're not seeing inflation. You're seeing real wages growth, which is still fairly subdued, and that's a real issue, I think, for these central banks going forward, backing up these sort of hawkish moves that they're seeming to try and push through.
We see all over the markets that the risk appetite is high, although we see some movement on the interest rate side, because when we look at the equity pricings and also the valuations, we see them going higher as well. Do you believe that is going to change if the general mood, because of the central banks, will be another important issue for the markets?
I think that in terms of market volatility, that will be, I think, dependent on how the market really reacts to these tightening from the central banks. I think, obviously, through the equity markets, what we do tend to see is markets reacting a little bit negatively in the light of a tightening central bank. So certainly, if the Fed continues to push forward without there really being any sort of follow through on the economic growth side, and also these European Central Bank pushing through as well, without, again, inflation coming through, I think we could start to see markets getting a little bit more cautious with the fact that we're tightening into these economic conditions that are still not excessively picking up, and that would tend to see volatility picking up. And I think we've seen a little bit of that in the Eurozone this week with the DAX certainly coming off, and I think that could be an issue if the markets continue to react with a little bit of caution to these central banks turning a bit more hawkish.
Two last questions. The first one is the dollar's strength. Do you believe that there will be some upper move at the dollar index as well? Because we just saw that was around 95.5 last week. Do you believe that is going to change in the near future?
Yeah, I think what we have seen, obviously, in the last week is a good, strong reaction on the US dollar, rebounding higher as the Treasury yields have started to pick up. And what you've got on the dollar index is a big overhead resistance now between 96.50, 97.80. And I think if that little trading range is broken to the upside, then you could see the dollar sustaining a move on the reaction higher. But if you look at euro dollar, for example, it's pretty much just unwinding back towards $1.13. Again, that was a big key breakout. You've seen it on cable, you've got a breakout above 127.75. If that level holds as support, you could see again this little dollar reaction higher being sold into, and I think that that will be an interesting move potentially coming forward.
And the last question is about emerging markets. We saw some huge inflows throughout emerging markets this year. And do you believe that is going to change in the near future as well? Because when we look at, for example, Turkey, we saw the highest capital inflows since 2013. Do you believe that is going to be, there is going to be a divergence between the emerging markets? And if you say anything in Turkey in particular, we'll appreciate it as well.
Yeah, I'm not a big expert on Turkey, but I think what you have seen this year is obviously whereby the dollar has been under pressure, and that has certainly helped this inflow into emerging markets. Also, with treasury yields on the 10-year basis, certainly not really doing all that much to the upside. And if that, I think that will be a key. If you can see these treasury yields picking up sustainably, that could start to turn around this emerging markets inflow that we've seen this year.
Richard Perry, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Evet, Richard Perry'nin görüşleri böyleydi.